All right, welcome everyone. This is episode 16 of Wealth Talk, unraveling current events and market trends with Plena Wealth Advisors. We've got our usual crew of Craig White up in Kelowna and myself down in Vancouver. Clark Linton's missing today from action, but we've got a very interesting replacement with Ed Mills, our Washington policy analyst with Raymond James down in the US. He joined us last year for a podcast, bringing some insights on the political environment, and with the U.S. election coming at us, we thought that it would be timely to get his insights once again. So thanks, Ed, for joining us, and we're looking forward to what you have to tell us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, maybe I'll get right into it. As Jim mentioned, you got November 5th coming up. Here in Canada, we've got a federal election that, could be any time between now and the next 12, 15 months. But, when we're chatting with clients, it certainly is topical. What's happening south of the border, what can we expect? And since we had you on, I think it was June 2023, certainly a lot has happened, a lot has changed on the U.S. political landscape. And, more recently with Biden stepping aside and Kamala stepping in, it's down to Trump and the Biden-Harris administration. So why don't you give an update on kind of where things are at right now and what polls are saying, which again, continue to change. But why don't we start off there and kind of take the conversation?
Yeah, Craig, I think what we've been saying all year is expect the unexpected, and man alive, have we gotten that in spades. With that as the caveat, as we're having this discussion today, things are exceptionally close. You mentioned polls. We look at a lot of different things. One of the things that we have highlighted throughout last year, throughout this year, one of the proxies that is a good indicator as to opportunities to win an election is favorability rating. One of the most unexpected events since the Vice President Kamala Harris has entered the race is she went from a mid to low 30 favorability rating to a high 40s, and some of these favorability ratings are showing that she's above 50%. Generally speaking, if you like someone, you tend to vote for them. If you don't like someone, you tend not to vote for them. So that has been part of what it was clearly Donald Trump's election to lose when Biden dropped out, where it's much more of a toss-up right now. That favorability rating probably makes it more likely than not she wins the national popular vote, barring some major changes. I'll do all my appropriate caveats. But if you win the national popular vote in the United States, that doesn't mean you win the presidency. It all comes down to the Electoral College. So we're watching 7 states that are the key swing states. That's Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But if I had to say there's one state I'm really looking at, it's Pennsylvania. It's
Right.
Very hard to see the vice president winning if Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania. And it's very hard to see Donald Trump winning if Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania. That could easily be the tipping state here.
Yeah, those are the big swings. I think that those represent about 93 or 94 of the electoral votes in there. Because maybe refresh our viewers here. It's 270.
Yep.
White House, right? And there's 3 branches that we talk about here. There's the White House, there's the House, and then there's Senate. So maybe walk our clients through where that's sitting at right now, all 3 levels there.
Yeah, totally. So you're correct. It's 270 electoral college votes. And so if you take what is expected to go to the Democrats and what's expected to go to the Republicans, again, using Pennsylvania as a guide, if Vice President Harris wins Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all very doable for a Democrat, she's exactly at 270 electoral college votes. Kind of take Pennsylvania out of that and say a different scenario where Harris were to win Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, 4 of the 7, she's only at 268 electoral college votes. So it's, a lot of time I spend just clicking through maps of like giving this to this candidate, that to the other candidate. Oftentimes it's Pennsylvania. We could see some others, but those are some outlier scenarios. As you mentioned, it's not just an election for president. The House of Representatives, every 2 years in the United States, all 435 seats of the House of Representatives are on the ballot. And every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is on the ballot. A United States senator has a 6-year term, so they do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 every 2 years. The Senate is probably kind of the easier call here. If you rewind 6 years, you go back to 2018. That was the midterm election year when Donald Trump was president. That was a fantastic year electorally for Democrats. And so almost every single Senate seat they could have won, they won. So of the 34 seats on the ballot this time, 23 of them are held currently by Democrats. Only 11 are by Republicans. So when we look at the map and we see one of these states, West Virginia, a Democrat's retiring, it's easily going to be replaced by a Republican. You kind of start out 50-50. And there are a couple of Democrats in states that will be won by Donald Trump that easily could go towards the Republican challenger. So we're at about 70 to 75% probability that Republicans after this election will have a majority in the United States Senate. Now, for the House of Representatives, it's really close. Of the 435, you need 218 seats to have a majority. Republicans right now have 220 seats, about as small of a majority as you can actually have. And one of the big impacts of Kamala Harris coming onto the ticket is it's seen a big increase in excitement among the Democratic base. There are House seats by Republicans in big Democratic states like California and New York, who those Republicans are in toss-up, really close seats. If the Democrats come out, those Republicans probably lose. That could be as many as 8 seats right there alone. So we think that Democrats have a slight advantage in the House, but the makeup of Congress, whether or not it's going to be a sweep by either party or divided government, could absolutely have a big impact on kind of the market reaction over the next couple of years.
Now that's just going back to the Senate side there. If it's split 50-50, correct me if I'm wrong, whoever's sitting as vice president has the tie-breaking vote there. So again, if it's that close as you're saying on the Senate side, leaning towards Republicans right now, it really could come down to, again, who's sitting in the White House at that time.
So J.D. Vance or Tim Walz will be the tie-breaking vote in the Senate in a 50-50 Senate. And so if Donald Trump wins, it is almost, we're in 95+% probability there's a Republican Senate. Then we'd be looking at, okay, did Democrats win the House? Oftentimes, who wins the national popular vote has the House. If Harris wins, we're going to be saying, all right, if it was 50-50, Democrats keep that majority. Easily could be less than 50 for Democrats, and that's where that check, that Republican Senate with a Harris White House becomes the possibility.
What do you make of the fact that since Biden dropped out and Kamala was obviously brought in, the markets have actually done quite well? I mean, a lot has happened kind of, geopolitically and economically kind of during that time frame, but is the market pricing in a continuation of the current kind of political policy, and the flip side of that is, does that then set us up for, if Trump is elected and the various houses go Republican, is it likely that the market might discount that in some way? I guess what's the kind of major market impact that you could see depending on which way things go?
Yeah, Jay, that's a good question. I think that the interesting thing to me has been I spend my days talking to institutional investors in the United States, in Canada, Europe, Asia, around the world. I find very few who have a strong feeling of exactly how this election is going to go. So I don't get a sense that a lot of the institutional investment money in this market is really making a bet one way or another. You mentioned the market has done quite well this year. At a certain point, it looked like Donald Trump was guaranteed to win victory next year, and it was still doing fine, right? Mm-hmm. The market did well when Trump was presidency, in the first several years of his presidency. COVID was COVID. The market's done well when Biden has been in the office. So I do think that we tend to look at the thing that is front and focused in the news and saying, oh, this is going to be the big thing. I think for the market, for the most part, inflation has been a bigger story. Kind of Fed monetary policy has been a bigger story. Some of the geopolitical issues have been a bigger story. The election matters, but I've always told folks, kind of especially when we're thinking about long-term horizons, don't make big moves around election outcomes. Stick to the plan. My job is to kind of let you know when there are certain risks out there, either to an individual name, a sector, the market generally. And I can find multiple reasons why the market could be up almost in any election scenario. And I can also find reasons the market could be down in almost any election scenarios. It really is just going to be dependent upon who wins, what they focus on, what the Congress looks like, what the economy is doing. It's just one piece of this larger puzzle that we're always trying to figure out as we're looking at this market.
Yeah, one thing you touched on, a couple of words there, monetary policy and inflation. I think anybody that's been associated with investing, that's kind of been top of the list of things that have been a bit of headwinds. Seems like we're through that now. You've had majority of global central banks, cutting rates. Bank of Canada, we've cut 3 times over the last number of months. More recently, you had the Federal Reserve cut by 50 basis points. But on either side here, Ed, inflationary concerns. A lot of people talk about some of these Trump tariffs that are on the table. 60% tariff to China, 10% global tariff. Is there fear of inflationary pressures on either side, but in particular, maybe leaning towards the Trump side if he does get elected and you start to get into that the geopolitical side with tariffs?
Yeah, so I think that if there is a Trump victory, there will absolutely be higher tariffs. There will be trade wars. We'll be looking at the extension of the tax cuts next year, which could add a significant number of dollars to the deficit in the United States. He's promised some pretty aggressive moves on immigration. You take that in totality and say, all right, well, does the Federal Reserve pause and wait to figure out exactly the fiscal impact of that and the inflationary impact of that? So I think at a bare minimum in a Trump election, that concern about a potential second wave of inflation, which we almost always have, those are going to be elevated in the near term. When I talk to investors about Harris in her policies, one of the things that is the focus of inflation over the last several years, 40% of the inflation metric in the United States is owner equivalent rent. How expensive is housing? And so we've seen a significant increase in immigration into the United States. If we were to see immigration reform, are we bringing folks and putting them into permanent sources of housing? There's a lot of absorption that needs to take place in some houses that are being built, especially in the multifamily in the United States. But because of those higher interest rates of the last couple of years, once we get through the pipeline of what's being built, there's almost nothing behind that. So the conversation I've had with a number of investors is, all right, maybe year 1 and 2, inflation concerns are a little bit more acute if Trump wins. Maybe years 3 and 4 would be kind of where inflation concerns would be somewhat more acute if Harris wins. The final thing there is because we wouldn't have those trade wars, those tariff fights, some of that immigration at the near term, I think the monetary policy is more predictable in a Harris victory.
So as most of our clients are up here in Canada, what do you make of kind of Canada-US policy with either candidate coming?
So I think it's super fascinating because what we have written a number of times about the Trump potential trade wars is that if we were to rank order who Trump would want to have a trade war with, is number 1 is Canada. Not Canada. Number 1 is China. Number 2 is Mexico. Number 3 is the EU. Number 4 is the rest of the world. And so I think people understand why I would put China number 1 on that list. But I do get a lot of questions as to why Mexico is number 2. and that could have a significant impact on Canada. Number two is Mexico, because of what's known as the Mexico backdoor. We've seen massive excess capacity in China right now because their economy is pretty weak. If you send something almost finished to Mexico, and the last portion of transformation is in Mexico, then under the USMCA, it can come into the United States tariff-free. And so we've seen warnings from both the Biden administration, from the Trump campaign to say, hey, if this sticks up, as it keeps going, we're going to have a real problem with that. So as I look forward, in the mid of 2026, if any one of the three countries, the United States, Canada, or Mexico, asks for a renegotiation of the USMCA, we renegotiate the USMCA. Trump's elected, the fights over the Mexico backdoor, the fights over immigration, probably some personality fights with the new president of Mexico. Potentially, we'll see what the government of Canada looks like during, after your elections. Those fights, we're going to be talking a lot about, is the USMCA going to get extended? Is it going to get ripped up? Is Canada going to be the collateral damage to a food fight between the United States and Mexico? That's what I'd be focused on. And I think if we have a Trump election here throughout next year, as we talk about this, it's going to seem so obvious, but I don't get a sense that people are focused on it today. And that's probably one of the underappreciated issues, I think, that I identify in this campaign.
I mean, Biden, he didn't reduce any of the tariffs that Trump put in place either.
No.
So it's, I guess, not necessarily a given that if Kamala were to win, she would take any easier stance on, the tariffs. I mean, it's hard to imagine her employing more tariffs.
It's the rate of
against
change,
Canada,
though, I
but
think. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so she doesn't pull any of them off. China still is being viewed in the United States as a foreign adversary. We still increase restrictions on technology with China, but it's in a more predictable pattern inside the normal guardrails of policymaking. Trump's election adds more uncertainty. He's not saying, let's keep this at 10% or this at 15%. He's saying, like, let's go to 60%, maybe 100%. Let's see what you can do to force a Chinese response. And that's where kind of the market volatility that occurred during his first term was very acute as it relates to the U.S.-China relationship. And that is absolutely kind of something that we would see returning if he were elected here in November.
Far more protectionist type administration under Trump, hey?
Yeah, more protectionist, but think about it against the backdrop of what the Biden administration has done with the Chips and Science Act, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, American Rescue Plan. U.S. policy right now is rebuilding the industrialization of the United States, rebuilding that industrial base, more onshoring. I think in a Biden and then a potential Harris administration, friendshoring is kind of a higher priority, where true onshoring is a priority in a Biden administration or in a Trump administration. One thing that both Biden really pushed for, Trump would push for, is a lot more Buy American provisions, which when I talk to Canadian investors, oftentimes Canadian companies are the ones that are impacted the most on Buy American provisions.
You wonder if the state of China's economy right now, with it being in such a desperate position, kind of creates an opportunity for Trump really to press them on, or whoever gets in the next administration to really press them on some of these things, because they really are in a weak position of bargaining at this point, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where people still feel as if China has more to lose than we have to lose as we push on some of those things. So I do think that on tech restrictions, we're seeing it more and more on restricting things like TikTok, maybe making some restrictions on different other e-commerce apps from China, like a Temu, Shein, AliExpress. That's where we're seeing policy moving in the United States, saying, all right, are there certain things that, from a national security perspective, that we should limit our commerce and kind of biological, or there's the Biosecure Act. That's why it's the healthcare relationship, the tech relationship. A national security lands on everything China related, but China needs our markets to sell their goods, so they're a little bit limited in how much they can actually respond.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just switch over quickly to foreign policy here, because again, that's quite topical with our clients, and with the ongoing Russia, Ukraine, with what they're going through more recently, the last couple of weeks, you've seen a resurgence of what's happening with Hezbollah and the whole Israeli side of things. For a couple of years now, Trump has continued to pound the table that under his administration, none of these things would have happened. And the other side of it is, the argument that the Biden administration has been, too weak on a response here. Do you see any sort of off-ramp or solution as we go forward with what we're seeing with unrest globally here?
I think it's hard to prove a negative. So it's one of those things. It's easy to say, oh, this wouldn't have happened. Donald Trump does have the 4-year track record under his kind of presidency that he does point to quite a bit. As it relates to a go-forward basis, I do think that for a number of these global conflicts, they're somewhat locked in until after November 5th. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for some level of off-ramps in each of those conflicts after that. That said, probably where we know the least about Vice President Harris is her foreign policy views. How would she be as a commander-in-chief? So we've seen historically global bad actors test new presidents. A debate I have with folks is, well, what else is there left to test with a number of these flare-ups globally? But that is a potential area of volatility in the markets. I always try to bring it back to the markets. That is a potential risk premium that could be entered into oil markets, energy markets generally. So if I'm thinking ahead and I'm putting together what are some of those risk factors that I'm watching for, certainly geopolitical risk is high on the list for either one of them, but probably slightly higher in a Harris administration, just because folks will be looking to see how she reacts to certain flare-ups globally.
I think that kind of covers the docket for our side, but I guess before we let you go, can we ask what you might predict the outcome of the election will be? And if maybe I'll ask one more thing, if you have any kind of non-consensus views that you'd like to share that might not get a lot of airtime out there.
Yeah, so I think on the presidential election, I really loathe ever giving 50-50 odds, but that's really where this election is. It's about as much of a toss-up. If Harris continues the momentum that she has had since she's become the nominee, and continues that through November 5th, she wins. If we have a polling miss like we had in 2016 and 2020, if we have Trump surge at the end of the campaign, like we saw him surge in 2016 and 2020, he wins. So that's why it's really hard to predict. So those are the two things I'm watching. Who keeps the momentum, or is that surge? Auto consensus issue, really look for, regardless of who wins this election, a series of efforts to add to deregulation in the permitting process in the United States. We've seen a massive need for new energy as we have gone and built the data centers, as we think about AI being built up. People think that things like the Inflation Reduction Act that support a lot of green energy in the United States could be at risk if Donald Trump is elected. People think that Democrats might not be as pro-deregulation if they get control of the White House. I think that's wrong. I think both parties recognize that it takes too long to build things in the United States, and they're going to push aggressively to deregulate. And so that reindustrialization, that support for nuclear, hydrogen, wind, solar, EVs is a massive kind of sea shift that has occurred in DC that happens regardless of who wins this election. And it's really interesting.
At the end of the day, really, if the House of Representatives is leaning Democrat, the Senate's leaning Republican, the White House is up, it's a toss-up right now. Gridlock's likely outcome here, Ed?
Yeah, it in some ways, yes, but there are some must-do things, like regardless of who wins, the expiration of the tax changes from 2017 for individuals expire on December 31st of next year. So yes, we might have gridlock on certain issues, but you're going to have to make a decision on that one way or another. We're going to have the debt limit. We have to fund the government. We have to figure out our defense policy. So even when there's been gridlock over recent years, Congress has been sneaky successful in getting things across the finish line into law. And so I think major changes are less likely in a split government, and therefore the markets tend to like that more. But that doesn't mean nothing gets done.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea that deregulation is going to be outcome no matter what is a positive note to end on, with the markets likely reacting positively to any progress on that front. And the whole relationship with Canada, I think, likely benefits from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we are a big friend and hopefully stay that way. So I think with that, we'll kind of tie it up here, Ed. It's been great to have you on, and appreciate your views, and hopefully we can touch base next year with whoever's in charge down there, and hopefully some success to brag about.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And we'll see when that kind of Stanley Cup thing goes north, but
yeah, on that. We almost had it.
almost.
Always appreciate your time, Ed. Take care, and yeah, thanks for your time again.
All right, see you. Thanks,
Ed.
Well, there you go. It's as we said, I know it's very topical here, Jay, that our clients are wondering what's happening on the political front, and we may be biased here with Ed being a Raymond James colleague, but he truly is one of the best out there and one of the most highly respected guys within the Washington circle, and you can see there he's got a strong working knowledge of what's happening out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think importantly, one of the things that he was, pretty upfront about emphasizing is the fact that if you have a long-term horizon and you're investing for more than 4 years, whoever's in power shouldn't really be playing into your investment decisions. And that's something that we've certainly been consistent on. It's interesting to see which way certain administrations' policies are going to go, but the biggest best companies out there that we tend to focus on, are making investments and building factories and strategizing for decades, not 2-year periods. So keep that in mind, and there's things at the margin that we want to be paying attention to, and certainly want to be supporting people's ability to vote and all that sort of thing. But yeah, these next 2 months are going to be interesting.
Yeah, politics always creates good fodder, and it's again, it's about as in your face as you can get right now, especially on mainstream media. And we've often said to our clients, at the end of the day, what drives asset prices is inflation and monetary policy. And as we've said in the last number of podcasts, those inflationary pressures are clearly behind us. Monetary policy is becoming more supportive, and that ultimately what drives asset prices. You look at what happened through 2022 when inflation and monetary policy was tightening. It was tough for asset classes, and you're seeing the other side of that over the past 6-12 months here. And markets as we sit today at the end of September, they're performing well. Portfolios are performing well. So we're positioning our clients' assets based off of more certainty, which is monetary policy and inflationary pressures and earnings for the companies that we own, as opposed to an unknown outcome on politics right now.
Yeah. And keep in mind the first year presidential cycles tend to be good ones, as the market tends to embrace the certainty of knowing, what kind of platform they're dealing with. And so we've got that to look forward to. But yeah, like you said, I think the Goldilocks scenario that we're in right now hopefully kind of persists, and we'll be talking about more interesting things than who's going to be running the U.S. government in the next couple months.
I wouldn't count your breath on that one. I got to think between now and whoever's elected, in particular, if it's on the Republican side, it's going to be very topical for the next 4 years, and we'll see.
Well,
It's
let's just hope for a peaceful transition of power this time around.
Yeah. Stability is the key word, and friendshoring, as Ed says. That's our key word as we finish up 2024. Friendshoring.
Yeah, but I like the positive comments on Canada's potential, no matter who gets in. So that's a good place to end on.
Yeah. Thanks for moderating as always. We'll have Clark certainly back on next time, but any questions, as always, from clients, any feedback, please pass them on to our Plena team, either myself, Jay, or Clark directly. And hopefully you continue to enjoy these podcasts, and stay tuned for some more exciting guests that we have between now and the end of the year. So thanks for tuning in. Jay, thanks again, as always.
Great. Thanks, everyone.